If you think this war is only between Israel and Hamas, you're not seeing the bigger picture. Now, just like practically every war in history, there are much larger geopolitical forces at play than what is being shown to you on the news. In this video, I'm going to break down who's involved in this war, why it started, and why now. If you ask anyone that lives in the Middle East, and especially in Israel, who is responsible for starting this war, they will answer you unequivocally, Iran. You see, in the Middle East, it's common knowledge that Iran, or more specifically the Islamic Republic of Iran, not to be confused with the citizens of Iran, control multiple terror proxies across the Middle East in an attempt to destabilize and eventually take over countries in the region. If you look at this map, you can see the different terror proxies. Iran trains, funds, and controls multiple terror proxies, namely Hezbollah in Lebanon, militant groups in Syria, Hezbollah and other militant groups in Iraq, the Houthi rebels in Yemen, and of course, Hamas and the Islamic Jihad in Gaza. Now, almost every single one of these proxies has attacked either Israel or the United States since October 7th, which should already tell you something. The Wall Street Journal has reported that in the weeks leading up to October 7th, 500 Hamas fighters received specialized combat training in Iran. The Wall Street Journal also reports that Iran gave the final go-ahead for the attack on the Monday before October 7th. Okay, so Iran provides all the funding, trains all the fighters, gave the go-ahead command, and basically orchestrated the attack on October the 7th. But why would they do that? And why now? Allow me to introduce you to the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. At the G20 summit held in New Delhi on September 9th, 2023, leaders of France, Germany, India, Italy, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, the United States, and the European Commission unveiled the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. This corridor would create an economic route from India through the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Israel, all the way to Europe.
The new corridor will begin in Mumbai, where ships with cargo bound for Europe will dock at Dubai, and from there by rail through Saudi Arabia, Jordan and Israel, and then onward by ship to the Greek port of Piraeus. Sections of the rail network are getting ready or are up and running, such as the 140 kilometers rail link from Dubai to the Saudi border has been completed. The Saudi north-south rail link, which is over 1,000 kilometers long and reaches the Jordanian border, is also ready. What is required is the completion of the 300 kilometers link from Jordan to the Israeli port of Haifa. It is estimated that this multimodal transport corridor will cut the current shipping time from Mumbai to Piraeus from 17 days to 10 days.
But guess what else would be built? Oil and gas pipelines. These pipelines would connect the Middle East oil and gas to Israel. And from there, they could be easily transported via the Mediterranean to Europe. Another option is that these pipelines could eventually connect directly with the already agreed upon East Med pipeline. The East Med pipeline would be the longest natural gas pipeline in the world, and it would go from Israel to Cyprus to Greece, and finally to Italy, and from there to the rest of Europe. Now, while the East Med pipeline is still in its final plans and choosing the final route, the countries have already signed the agreement. Why is this so important? Enter Russia. Yes, Russia. Russia just recently announced that Hamas is not a terrorist organization and that Israel does not have the right to defend itself. That seems kind of odd, doesn't it? All of a sudden, Russia is backing Hamas after having generally very good ties with Israel over the years? So, the largest energy pipeline project in the world is owned by the Russian government. It is the most funded energy project in global energy ever. It's Putin's little baby built over the last 20 years. This system goes from Russia's territory to half of the world, including Europe. Up until the war with Ukraine, Russia supplied 50% of all of Europe's gas. But once the war with Ukraine started, Europe and the West quickly realized that they're almost completely dependent on Russian energy. Now, even with the Western sanctions that were put on, Russia made in the last year $350 billion from exporting oil and gas. That is huge money. That is continuing to fund the Russia war in Ukraine, but even more importantly, this pipeline has been weaponized against Europe. By restricting the supply of gas to Europe, gas prices rose 700% in Europe last year. That's a weapon. The India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor would be an alternative for Europe to purchase their oil and gas from countries which they're friendly with. And this would be a catastrophic hit to Russia's income. This comes after already a pretty large hit after a mysterious attack on Russia's Nord Stream pipeline last year.
If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
Iran has the world's second largest natural gas reserves after Russia. But due to US sanctions, the development of their gas exports has been very slow. Well, in July of 2023, Iran and Russia signed a $40 billion energy deal that would move Iranian oil and gas through the Russian pipelines and eventually to Europe, which would be a way for Iran to circumvent existing sanctions on their energy today. This is another piece of the puzzle and why Iran has a big interest in the failure of this new economic corridor. Who knows what the West was thinking allowing these pipelines to be built? This was a strategic catastrophe for the West. But I guess if you've been so busy over the last 20 years fighting wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, all post 9/11, then you kind of have your eye off the ball. Now, eventually the US woke up and understood what was going on and tried to warn Europe, but their warnings fell on deaf ears, perhaps because of the messenger.
It's very sad when Germany makes a massive oil and gas deal with Russia, where you're supposed to be guarding against Russia, and Germany goes out and pays billions and billions of dollars a year to Russia. So we're protecting Germany, we're protecting France, we're protecting all of these countries, and then numerous of the countries go out and make a pipeline deal with Russia, where they're paying billions of dollars into the coffers of Russia. So we're supposed to protect you against Russia, but they're paying billions of dollars to Russia, and I think that's very inappropriate. And the former chancellor of Germany is the head of the pipeline company that's supplying the gas. Ultimately, Germany will have almost 70% of their country controlled by Russia with natural gas.
The US, under the Trump administration, realized that they need to act and build a plan to remove Europe's dependency on Russian energy, which is truly Russia's deadliest weapon. Enter the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords, signed in September of 2020, created a normalization between Israel and the UAE, Bahrain, as well as Morocco and Sudan. Now, this was the first piece of the puzzle in this economic corridor plan. While Saudi Arabia did not join the Abraham Accords at the beginning, it is widely understood that they gave the green light for the accords to happen. What does Saudi Arabia gain from all of this? Well, first of all, they get to export oil and gas to Europe, so money. Second, Saudi Arabia has a very bold vision for the Middle East. They want to be a leading country in the Middle East, and they aim to turn the Middle East into the new Europe over the next 30 years.
أنا أعتقد أن أوروبا الجديدة هي الشرق الأوسط.
But perhaps most importantly, Saudi Arabia, as well as other moderate Arab nations and Israel, have a common enemy, Iran. Remember we talked about Iran's proxies, one of them being the Houthis in Yemen? You know, the ones that just recently declared war on Israel and fired cruise and ballistic missiles to the south of Israel? Well, Saudi Arabia has been at war with the Houthis since 2015. Another proxy war with Iran. Most famously, the Houthis have attacked Saudi Arabia's oil refineries. That's a big no-no. So not only does Saudi Arabia have a huge economic incentive to normalize relations with Israel, but you know the saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend? There is a security incentive for Saudi Arabia to make peace with Israel, creating a strong Middle East alliance against Iran. Now that we understand some of the geopolitics, let's jump back to the present. So September 9th, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor is announced at the G20 summit. Parts of the railways are already built, and the plan is in full swing. The final missing piece is normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. On September 21st, a little under 2 weeks after the announcement, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia was interviewed on Fox News and openly said for the first time that normalization with Israel is getting close.
What would it take for you to agree to normalize relations with Israel?
Well, there is approach from President Biden administration to get to that point. For us, the Palestinian issue is very important. Every day we get closer.
Just before the interview went to air in downtown New York, this coordinated interview in the sidelines of the UN Assembly.
If you and I, 10 years ago, were talking about normalization with Saudi Arabia, and I think we'd look at each other like, who's been drinking what?
Then, the day after that, at the UN General Assembly, Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, gives this speech.
Now look at what happens when we make peace between Saudi Arabia and Israel. The whole Middle East changes. We tear down the walls of enmity. We bring the possibility of prosperity and peace to this entire region. We'll build a new corridor of peace and prosperity that connects Asia through the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel, to Europe.
He calls it the new Middle East. And for the first time ever, he speaks openly about peace with Saudi Arabia and that it's very close. Now, this is very likely the point that Iran decided it needs to do something immediately before it's too late. If the agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia is signed, there would not only be a security coalition to thwart Iran in the Middle East, but they would be missing out on billions and billions in revenue. 2 weeks later, the massacre of October 7th happened. With such a bold and deadly and gruesome attack, Iran knew that Israel would have no choice but to completely destroy Hamas, which would very likely also cause civilian casualties, as Hamas literally hides behind and underneath civilians. It is quite literally their strategy to produce as many innocent civilian deaths as possible to gain sympathy. This would cause an outcry in the world, which we are seeing now. This would put a lot of pressure on Saudi Arabia to back out of the deal, especially considering that both the Palestinians in Gaza and the Saudis are both Sunni Muslims. Without the Saudi Arabia deal, the India, Middle East, Europe corridor is killed. Iran wins, Russia wins, China wins. So what about Israel and Hamas? Listen, the Israel and Hamas conflict is a very real one. Hamas is a real threat to Israel's security and is also the reason why we can't achieve peace in the region.
يجب أن ننتهي.
أن ينتهي وين؟
بس
بقطاع غزة؟
ينتهي لا بتكلم عن كل الأراضي الفلسطينية.
كل الأراضي الفلسطينية يعني
طبعاً.
زوال إسرائيل؟
طبعا.
In this case, it's becoming increasingly clear that Iran just sacrificed Hamas for their own plan. Hamas and the Palestinians expected wide Arab and Iranian support against Israel, especially from Hezbollah on the northern border. But so far, they basically have left them on their own. It's sad to see the Palestinians yet again used as a pawn in the Arab Muslim world's fight against Israel, while the Palestinian people suffer the consequences.